Hey guys, how often have you encountered this scenario? You're facing your GP, you're facing your dietitian or nutritionist, and they suggest you eating a high protein, low GI diet, and that leaves you with more questions than answers. It happens often in my practice, and I found the best advice from Jessica Turton, who's visited us before. She's the principal dietitian for Ellipse Health, and she's going to help us shed some light over what having a high protein diet means. Hello, Jess.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
Well, thank you. Look, let me start this by informing people that the guidelines that we're basing most of our information from are back from 2006. And they were suggesting then that men from the age of 19 to 70 were meant to be consuming zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilo and women zero point 0.6. And things have changed clearly since. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I definitely think the recommendations have been set far too low, as I'm sure you would agree. Unfortunately, with a lot of the nutrition guidelines, they are actually set to show the minimum amount that is going to give good health outcomes for the population. So it's not necessarily
Yeah.
an optimal target to aim for to reach your health goals or to improve your management of a chronic disease. It's actually like the lower limit you should aim for. So really, no one should be going below those targets. But what I find in practice is most people need to go much higher than those targets. And there's many reasons for that. One of the main reasons is that protein is a building block of our body. And a lot of people
Mm.
these days have chronic inflammatory conditions, and their protein turnover is actually a lot higher.
Hi.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So their body's, chucking out damaged proteins and it says, hey, I need new protein from the diet to build myself back up stronger than I was before. And I think a really interesting example that's very relevant to, what people talk about today in health is the whole concept of leaky gut, for example. Like,
Yeah.
why is our gut leaky? Why is our gut not strong enough? Well, a very simple way to think about it is your gut is made of protein, right? And a lot of people just aren't eating enough protein to meet their individual requirements. And then that can lead to conditions like leaky gut.
Right. So we as a society, we're protein deficient. And like you say, those recommendations are for pure maintenance.
Yeah, yeah. It's not really like a therapeutic recommendation. So, if someone's coming in and they've got like multiple nutrient deficiencies, they've got inflammatory conditions, maybe they want to lose weight, then their protein requirements are potentially going to be, double that of the RDI.
What would you suggest for someone who's trying to gain muscle? Because most of my patients are undergoing weight management or they've got a chronic issue. And not only are they having to have um, a restricted intake for the weight management, but also they'll have a tendency towards losing muscle. There's muscle wasting, which is default when you're doing weight management. What would you recommend?
Yeah, a lot of the standard approaches to weight loss do tend to lead to muscle loss as well, which is quite unfortunate because, as you would probably know, your muscle mass is like your main determinant of your metabolic rate. If you lose muscle, it's actually going to make weight management more difficult over the long term, even if you do happen to lose weight in the short term.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing to acknowledge because a lot of people want faster weight loss and they just want to see those scales come down. But in fact, eating more protein and maybe getting slower weight loss, preserving that muscle could be really, really useful over the long term. Now, if you're trying to build muscle, then we certainly would be looking at a protein intake closer to 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram. And if we
Mhm.
compare that to the RDI, which is like zero 0.6 or zero 0.8, you can see it's a big difference.
And let me highlight that what most people don't get is, to begin with, most people don't do body composition. And so they're fixed on weight, which is just purely a value, and they're losing muscle mass to fat. So they're actually wasting muscle when they're eating so low protein. So that those are fantastic recommendations. So 1.5 grams to 2 grams per kilo, which is a hell of a lot of protein. And that's a big challenge that most people struggle with.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, when we're actually talking to patients about how to do this practically, I very rarely say, all right, you need to eat exactly this amount of protein in grams per day, because I
Yeah,
really don't expect people to start, counting their
it's
protein.
impractical.
Yeah, as you say, it's not like a one-to-one ratio, but we do know that if people consume at least 150 grams of protein food per meal,
Yeah,
that's going to help them meet their minimum protein requirements. And when I say minimum, I mean our minimum, not the RDI minimum.
yeah,
But also help them meet a lot of their requirements for micronutrients, so iron, B12, zinc. So if you use that as a really general rule of thumb, a place to start, at each of my meals, I need to have at least 150 grams of protein foods, meat, fish, eggs, nuts, yogurt, things like that. Then you're ticking a lot of boxes. And I think it is a good place to get people started. And then we sort of just move up and down from there.
and that was my next question. So give us some practical tips on how to increase our protein. So you're saying that animal protein, vegetable protein, it's easier to get all the essential amino acids from animal protein against vegetable protein. But you can find it in things like beans and legumes, eggs, cheese, yogurt. Any other practical tips on where to get your protein from?
Well, I mean, in terms of animal versus plant protein, I think the problem with plant proteins for a lot of people is that if they're using them as their main source of protein, they find it very difficult to eat enough. Not impossible, but just a little bit more challenging. So I guess that's the thing to think about there. The best sources of protein, in my opinion, are the animal based protein foods, not only because they have more of those amino acids, as you said, but because they have the most micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals.
Yeah,
So if we can prioritize those foods, so as I said, the meat, the fish, the eggs, and any sort of variety of those foods, right? Like some people like pork, some people like chicken, some people like beef. It really doesn't matter. They're all good sources of protein. And I generally recommend
yeah,
people try to aim for a bit of a variety of their protein foods. So if they're always doing red meat, maybe try to include some fish and maybe try to include some dairy and maybe try to include some nuts and seeds. Or if they're always doing eggs, maybe try to include more variety there, because that's just going to help contribute to satiety, so feeling of fullness. It's going to help with diet satisfaction as well. Like rather than thinking you're so restricted and you don't have many foods to eat, try to show people that there are lots of options. And it will help with that micronutrient intake, which I think, is a big key factor when we think about weight management and muscle gain. So many people get stuck on protein, fat, carbs, calories, and a lot of people forget about the importance of vitamins and minerals.
that's essential because lots of people undergo weight management options are calorie restricting, and with that goes all their macronutrients, and at the end they achieve their weight goals and they're deficient in most micronutrients and minerals. So at the end they're malnourished, and you can see them. They look unhealthy. Against a slow, guided, sustainable weight management, which is high in protein, they look healthy. They haven't lost muscle, and you can tell that in the practice. That's
Mm.
fantastic, Jess. And the other challenge that I encounter is some of my patients end up doing intermittent fasting, and their intake is restricted to 2 meals and a snack. How do you manage to squeeze in all that protein in 2 meals? Jess, how do you manage those patients that are doing intermittent fasting and you've got to squeeze 2 big servings of protein in those 2 meals they've got in a snack?
Well, it's definitely possible to do so. A lot of patients are doing intermittent fasting for weight loss, or they're just naturally intermittent fasting because they don't like eating breakfast or they're time poor or whatever it is. Now, if you're only doing 2 meals, you're probably going to want to increase your protein intake at those 2 meals compared to what you'd be doing at 3 meals. So
Yeah.
you do want to try and fit it in. You don't just want to like drop it off. Now, one thing that you might do is add in a protein rich snack between the two meals. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than having 3 full meals in that condensed eating window, you might have 2 meals and then a protein snack. So that protein snack could be some hard-boiled eggs. It could be some like cheese and olives and maybe some nuts. It could be some high protein yogurt with some protein powder or nuts and seeds on top. So it doesn't have to be this big voluminous meal. It can be something quite small and quick and easy to prepare. But I do think it's important, especially if you're trying to maintain or build muscle, to have protein on 3 occasions at minimum a day, but they
Yes.
can be condensed into a shorter eating window.
And that's because the absorption rates are better if you separate those meals.
Yeah, pretty much. Like if you're trying to like fit the same amount of protein in 1 meal versus 3 meals, you're more likely going to get more protein absorption in the 3 meals.
Yeah, correct. That's fantastic. That's very good advice. What's your take on shakes and as a protein replacement?
Look, I think they're practical and convenient for a lot of people. I think, there are definitely a lot of people that do find it difficult to eat more protein. And maybe they come from a dieting background where they're used to calorie restricting and portion control, or maybe they're someone that has a bit of a low appetite. So a protein shake can be really handy in those situations. It can also be useful for people that are time poor. So I think when it comes to a protein shake, just making sure you're looking at the ingredients and trying to find one that has the least amount of additives and ideally one that doesn't have sugar. So I would recommend like a whey-based protein or a collagen-based protein. If people aren't eating animal products, then like a pea protein or hemp seed protein can be good. But I think we need to make sure we're also putting ingredients in the protein shake that are healthy and going to help stabilize our blood sugar levels. So some berries, maybe some yogurt, and some milk, perhaps even some healthy fats like avocado or coconut cream.
And for those of you that are trying to lose weight, it's not only about the protein, you also need to do exercise and weight resistance training. And obviously, the substrate is essential, but also the usage of your muscles. And just to sum up, the 5 benefits of protein that we've concluded is: 1, there's definitely more appetite control because it bulks you and it gives you satiety. 2, it gives you a metabolic boost because you're burning when you're eating against just eating carbohydrates. 3, it reduces your cravings again because of satiety and fullness, so it will be the bulk of your meal. It improves your composition because you end up gaining muscle if you work on the muscle, and it's a reduced energy intake against having carbohydrate protein. So all in all, protein is essential, and you've made life much easier for all of us. Thank you, Jess. And so if anyone would like to contact Jess or her team, who are all fantastic dietitians, it's Ellipse Health, and I'll add it on the notes attached to this podcast.